I have joining me to discuss Putin's expected arrival in North Korea, global affairs analyst Adebayo Oluwaki. Good to have you join us. So we seem to be seeing now how Pyongyang is opening up since the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen the first leg of this visit of Kim Jong-un to Russia. But why are we seeing this partnership now, and what's in the offering?
Well, as you know, the international environment from the perspective of these two countries have become increasingly much more dynamic. And the pressures being mounted by the West is definitely influencing the closer ties that we are witnessing. Russia and North Korea, they've always been close. But perhaps North Korea has been closer to China than it is to Russia. But like I said, the dynamics confronting both states makes it imperative that they should actually move closer. Like you mentioned in your background report, there had already been indications of closer military relationship between North Korea and Russia. There have been speculations that North Korean weapons, especially small arms and ammunition, were being shipped to Russia to enable Russia to maintain its military pressure on Ukraine in the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict. So I think the dynamics confronting both states today make it imperative for them to get closer to one another.
And the U.S. has expressed concern about security, when it comes to this partnership and this visit. But beyond Ukraine and supply of weapons to Russia by North Korea, what could this partnership mean for regional and global security?
Well, in terms of regional security, I would first of all like to take a different perspective. You see, there's always the narrative that North Korea is a threat. But we should remember that North Korea does not have a military base outside of its territory. North Korea does not have naval ships on other territorial, on other waters, or international waters, outside of its territory. North Korea does not have military forces deployed outside of its territory. So the narrative that North Korea is a threat is a narrative promoted by the West. Of course, North Korea engages in sometimes inexplicable use of missiles, especially around its neighborhood. But beyond that, it is not really a threat to anybody beyond that immediate region. Its military posturing suggests that its doctrine is entirely defensive. But given the context of the Ukraine conflict, there could be implications, like I said, because North Korea, of course, has been providing some weapons to Russia to maybe close the gap in domestic Russian production of certain kinds of weapons. But Russia is much more advanced in terms of the kind of weapons it produces. I think also that the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict and the systems that have been developed by NATO to respond to the Russian invasion have compelled Russia to deepen ties with other countries. Russia has expanded relationship within the BRICS zone and way beyond it. And we're beginning to see, for instance, when President Putin leaves North Korea, he's visiting Vietnam. So he's expanding his engagement with other states beyond the big BRICS zone. And also because Russia would like to foster some sort of a concert of states that can evade or avoid using Western established international means of exchange. And this is one of the things that is on the agenda for discussion with the North Korean leadership. And you know that North Korea has been under sanctions for a long time. So obviously this will entice President Kim Jong-un and lead him into wanting to be a part of that axis. So what we should see, imagine from this kind of bilateral engagements is a scenario in which all of the states that are sympathetic to Moscow would try to develop systems that can evade Western financial transactional instruments and means of exchange, and of course to try to deepen diplomatic and military ties.
Mm. And where does China fit in all of this? Could we begin to see a three-way alliance?
Yeah, very good question. China has always been very close to North Korea. In fact, if there's any country that is believed can influence North Korean policy, that country will be China. And so China plays its card with North Korea carefully. So I foresee that we would actually see a deepening of relations. The Chinese themselves will watch, even though they are allies with Russia or they are very friendly with Russia, they would also be watching this engagement, closely. But from an economic point of view, North Korea is not a strong economy. I mean, the GDP is just about $48 billion. That's less than the GDP of Lagos State, So economically, North Korea is not exactly, cannot upset or upstate China's relationship with Russia economically. It can only complement that. But I think that what we might see is a deepening of relationship, not just between China, Russia, and North Korea, but between China, Russia, Vietnam, the BRICS countries, of course, and then, of course, some other countries, especially in the Gulf, that have suddenly been gravitating towards Moscow. For example, the United Arab Emirates has been increasingly gravitating towards Moscow, and Saudi Arabia has also been gravitating towards Moscow. If we look at the recent meeting in Switzerland, where the so-called peace talk over Ukraine was held, you would find that a significant number of countries that were invited refused to sign the final communique that was issued. That also says something, feels about the new international system as it is presently seen. I feel that the West will keenly watch what is unfolding, and what I would expect is that there will be certain measures being accelerated now to make sure that this axis that is unfolding does not expand further. Because if it does, it will have implications of Western institutions of international
and I was just going to ask you about that, especially if it does, because you mentioned some countries that are gravitating towards Moscow. Some countries also have already gravitated towards China. South Africa and the countries where we've seen coups in Africa have also now gravitated towards Moscow. Are we heading towards what might seem like a multipolar world where the global order is significantly altered?
Definitely. I think you put it very correctly. We are seeing a multipolar world. The leading axis would be Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. This is definitely so. What we don't know yet are the number of countries that we would see, other than the ones we know presently that are allied to all of these three states that may be pitching to join in. And I think that from the standpoint of the South, there is room for an aggregation of states that will not be allied definitively with these three alliances, but definitely without, for instance, some years ago, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi had proposed what he called a concert of medium powers. And that concert of medium powers will have brought states in the global South to coalesce and to try to come together in order that they might be able to influence things much more in their favor. I think we may see something like that emerging again. But what is not in doubt is that the international system going from this point forward will most likely be influenced by a multipolar system, largely led by Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, as I said.
Really interesting conversation with you. Thank you so much for your time and analysis. Global Affairs Analyst at Adebayo Oluwaki. You're watching